Hey there, hello, welcome. My name's Peter. I'm the host of Catch Up. This is the show you're listening to right now. This is a brand new, very first episode of the show. I'm super excited that you took the time to join us. We're going to jump into things in like 2 seconds. I just want to give you a brief introduction to the people that I chatted with today. 2 super incredible people who are super passionate about what they do. And what they do is a new project, which you'll hear all about in today's episode about food, community, and art. 3 things that everybody can feel somewhere in their soul, but we have a little trouble bringing it to the surface. So got a chance to talk to Hayoung and Sofie about this. We had a great conversation. Let's just go ahead and jump into it. Well, welcome. Hi, Sofie. Nice to meet you. I'm Peter, obviously. Hayoung and I know each other, but this is our first time meeting.
Nice to meet you. How do you know Hayoung?
From church, basically, and then just general shenanigans around Ann Arbor the time that I lived there and he lived there at the same time, which it seems like between the two of us, the convergence of being in Ann Arbor at the same time is such a unlikely event in the universe because we both have been all over the place.
Yeah.
Very cool that we landed there when we did, and now we're kind of divergent, but pretty cool.
It's funny because in a lot of ways, I feel like Peter and I we're kind of cut from the same cloth. Like we're just kind of like go-getters, and it's like, but it's like never like it's planned out, but it's also kind of like YOLO too.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm 100% like I feel like with you specifically, Hayoung, and with I think a few other people at Redeemer, but there's definitely an atmosphere of like, well, if I'm gonna try it, like let's just do it, let's just whatever, make it happen. And to mixed results, that doesn't mean it's always everything's always smooth, but it's always fun. But I think Hayoung, you are way more spontaneous and willing to just do whatever needs to be done in the moment than I ever will be. So maybe you're not giving yourself enough credit for that.
Says the man in an RV traveling the country.
So that's a good point. I guess for context, with this being the first episode, I should say that, my wife and I live in an RV full time where we travel. And so we're in Utah right now. We were on the East Coast for a bunch of the time. Like we've been all over the place with this year. So, and we're just at the beginning. This is like the genesis of our journey. So, honestly, more than anything, this show is a way to pass time and connect with people that I want to talk to because there's not a lot of social interaction on highways in Kansas, but
is there an end destination?
I would love to say that we know exactly where we want to end up, but kind of the goal is just to go. And then if there's like a place that we feel kind of magnetized to that we don't want to leave, we'll be like, all right, well, we should start looking at apartments or houses or whatever here. But I think we have yet to find that place, which is really cool and exciting because it means we just get to keep going different places and trying things out. But as of right now, there's no final resting place.
Wow, how cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But it's not, we're not here to talk about me. Let's jump in with your guys' stuff. I think we've got some exciting stuff to cover. I want to give you guys a chance to really dig in on this topic. And so just to jumpstart it, if you guys can both kind of introduce yourself. I want to make it too like corny or hokey for like a food-based conversation where I do these, icebreaker things, but I think they can be helpful. So I'm just going to say like, introduce yourself with your name, what you do, and then your favorite food. That's easy. That starts.
Okay, well, we could do favorite food, but I think we could also do like, Sofie and I, we both have like an obsession of like a particular like type of food. So I think we should just go with that.
That's great. Yep.
Yeah. So I could go first.
Sure.
I'm Hayoung. I just recently graduated from my master's in public health program, and I dislike. I dislike it. I think data and research is not really for me, and I'm more interested in like stories. And I would say right now I'm obsessed with bread, and particularly sourdough, and I have so many stories associated with that. But I think overall, there's just something so special about like working with something that's also alive. And I don't feel like I have any, it feels so different where like, I feel like it's a partnership more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so that's been really special for me. And then, Sofie.
Nice.
I'm Sofie. I'm going into my final year as an undergrad studying design and Japanese at UC Davis. As much as I love bread, right now I'm a little bit obsessed with cheese. And so I have a project going on, and it's on my Instagram account called Fast Runs and Cheese, and I do a lino cut of a different cheese every single day.
Oh wow.
But it's called My 80 Cheese, and I'm going through the alphabet. So I do one cheese corresponding to each alphabet, and with that, I try to pair it with cheese facts of that specific cheese. So it's kind of my way of bridging my love for crafting and cheese and education, learning all into one. Because I think cheese it's kind of an industry like wine where you don't know a lot about it, and it seems like kind of hard to approach, like it is with art as well, I think. And so I think that's just my way of bringing that all together and trying to make it more approachable for everyone, including myself.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's such a neat project. I'll make sure that ends up in the show notes for this episode so people can go check that out. And learn more about. I definitely agree with what you're saying about like the wine side, where it feels like it's like this exclusive thing they do in Europe that you like don't hear about if you're like a lay person or a commoner. And then someone's like, oh, it's a very specific type of this and that, and it's so that's really neat to make it more approachable. And between bread and cheese, you guys are 2/3 of a charcuterie board right there. So that's
we need a meat person.
I
we
know,
need a meat person. We traveled. We were in Berlin together, and we were just staying at Sofie's sister's house. So it was just like a studio, and we were there for 2.5 weeks. But we met this lady who was like, she had a master's in cheese.
Oh my goodness! I didn't even know such a thing existed.
And her boyfriend had a master's in meat.
That's
and so
incredible.
like if we had them here, like it would be like the most amazing charcuterie board possible.
Yeah. Talk about a power couple. That's
straight up.
That's amazing. That's incredible. Well, so that's the two of you individually, but then you come together for this project that the goal is to talk about this hero. Like what can you give me, before we kind of dive into the entire explanation or the thought out stuff, like what is the elevator pitch, kind of 2 seconds? I say, hey, what do you do? Like, what are you doing?
Right now we're just calling it Food, People, Art. And we believe that food can't be reduced just down to nutrition or aesthetics, like making food Instagrammable. But that when you eat food, you're eating stories and you're consuming cultures and histories. And we want people to kind of ponder more deeply about those things. And we think that's important for people's own growth and I think for larger society too. So that it's kind of like our cultural project, I would say.
Sure. Yeah. And then maybe for the second half of this shorter explanation from you, Sofie, like, can you give us what the genesis of this project as like the two of you teaming up to do something, like where did that start? Where did that come from? What leads the two of you to want to do things about food and community together?
Well, Hayoung, after Berlin, Hayoung went to Bulgaria, and he did a bread internship. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. There was this lady. I'm gonna shout her out, Nadezhda, and she has a PhD from Princeton in cultural anthropology, and she, with her husband, started a bakery, like a bread house in Bulgaria. I was watching a video at like 3 a.m. in the morning 6 months ago before I was in Bulgaria, and she was sharing about bread art therapy, how baking bread in a community setting through narrative form can help people experience deeper thoughts about themselves and with each other, and how it can like foster peace across different lines. And so she's tried bread therapy in like racially difficult like racially tense geographic areas, foster care homes, orphanages, and she's seen kind of how bread therapy could really be valuable for people. And so I emailed her and I said, hey, can I come learn from you? And she's like, yeah, come through. So I literally went to Bulgaria, learned from her.
Were you not originally going to Bulgaria until you made that connection and thought, I gotta go fulfill this dream? That's amazing.
Yeah. And Sofie and I, when we were in Berlin, we would go to a new cafe every day, and then we would just talk. Like we were talking for hours about food. And it was like kind of scary at some point. I'm just like, bro, what's wrong with us? Like we're literally crazy people. Like it was scaring me at some point. And so this idea, it was just something that happened over that summer. And yeah, Sophie, do you want to add on to that? And I guess I kind of like had the ideas and I was like, hey, Sophie, like you need to work with me on this. And like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So like we were going to different cafes every day, trying different breads. Like we would sit there and talk about the bread like crazy people. And then at some point when we were done talking, we're like, I'm sure all the people around us were listening and thinking that we're really weird. But anyways, he went off to Bulgaria, did his thing, and meanwhile I was in the UK, in London, in Scotland, and York, doing a study abroad program for design, and that was mostly about like narrative environments and
Okay.
curating museums and experience design. And in that, like that time was very impactful for me because we got to visit a lot of museums. But my favorite thing about it was like the community engagement aspect of it. There was a lot of museums in Scotland that were like the whole concept was for the people. So they really prioritized the community and making sure that all these resources were free for everyone and accessible, and so that everyone has an opportunity to learn and to be a part of the community. And so coming out of that, when Hayoung called me about this, I was like, this makes so much sense. So design wise, I really loved it. And then food is like my absolute love. So I'm just really happy to be able to put that together and work together on this.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really exciting to know that with both of your situations, like independent things were happening in your life that kind of lined up the desire to do something, but the interest is able to converge in food as the specific area where like this is the impact I want to have and the area I want to do it in. I find that really cool. I think that is a testament to the success of this venture, that I feel like it has an engine behind it that's two independent people with drive, maybe independently in different directions, but when they converge on one point, you have kind of twice the firepower, which is really cool. So going off of talking about experience and what led you into this project. So before you guys are doing these specific areas of study and, spending a summer talking about bread, what is the original genesis for both of you of a love for food, a love for specifically finding new foods, tasting things, like that experience being more than, I say this as a total layperson, right? I am very much naive about food. I don't cook because I don't know how, and it seems like too much work. And my wife is an incredible cook, so I eat like a king, but I don't have the nuance and the brain power to like understand the significance. And so to me, it's like, well, if I go to McDonald's and I get a really horrible cheeseburger, or I have this amazing gourmet meal, like I don't have, I feel like, the awareness of my surroundings and the impact and the moment enough to like recognize the difference, which is to say, it seems like both of you guys have a really strong sense of that, and I'm interested to hear where that comes from. What was the time in your life you thought, I think that eating might be more of something I think about than most people?
I've always loved eating food. Like I would wake up in the morning and I was hungry and I was like, Mom, like what's for breakfast? and she'd make me something. And in Asian Korean diaspora contexts, usually like my parents' generation, their parents were like the Korean War vets and whatnot, and often grew up very poor, and they almost like have a post-war mindset where the parents, they never really tell you I love you explicitly, but they always say like, have you eaten yet? Like they're making sure that your basic needs are covered. And so even though my parents haven't experienced war necessarily, the way of them telling me I love you, and my grandparents of them telling me I love you, has always been through food. And so they would always ask me like, have you eaten yet? And I think for the longest time, when my parents and my grandparents would tell me, have you eaten yet? I would feel resentful because I was so full. And then I think literally a few years ago, I was reading something and it finally clicked for me that like my parents and my grandparents were telling me I love you. And that's when a lot of my perspective started to change on food as well.
Wow. That's really interesting. That's like a big cultural, I don't know if it's difference, but just like it's a language that doesn't speak directly, but kind of goes in this roundabout way. It says like love means taking care of somebody, so I'm going to give you care. and that's my way of saying it. Do you think that you were doing the same thing up until you kind of had that realization? Do you think that that was inherent in you, where you would have been more likely to say, like, hey, let's get some food, as a way of like expressing relationally to somebody?
Yes, I would say that I see I see everything that my parents did in me today.
Mm,
And so I was functionally doing the same thing without realizing it.
yeah.
And that's been so, like, my dad always tells me this one thing about how if you can't forgive your parents, you're going to become like them, but at their worst.
Oh, man.
And then if you're able to forgive them, like, you'll be like them at their best. And so in a lot of ways, I've been doing a revisionist history of my own life and how I act, where I realize that I can't help but be like my parents.
Mm,
And in learning to understand their perspective, I can redeem the things that I've inherited from them
yeah.
to be used for good. And so I don't have resentment towards my parents anymore.
Mm,
But definitely, like, it was a long process of trying to figure out, like, why my parents not very good at communicating their emotions to me at times,
yeah.
and trying to utilize food in a way now where it's like it's redemptive of my relationship with them, and now in the future for me with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Wow. That's really cool. I really like that line, that reference of, if you can forgive your parents, you'll be like them at their best. If you can't, you'll be them at your worst. That's, whew, it's like heavy stuff, but it's good. I mean, it's just like, you don't expect to hear that in the middle of a regular afternoon. So that hits hard.
Especially about food. But hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
food is at the center of all these things. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. And Sophie, what about you? What's the origin of your kind of love for food and community and that overlap?
That's kind of hard because I don't know. I've always grown up with food in my life as a big part of it. My parents really love to eat. Um, my dad didn't start cooking until my mom gave him a recipe book in college. And she was like, "Here, you are a dental student. You know how to follow instructions. Here, cook." So then he
Nice.
started cooking, and then that spiraled into like cooking for all the people in his flat. And so now he's a great cook. So both of my parents are really into food. We travel for food. That's
Mm,
kind of like we remember our celebrations by what we ate.
mm,
Um, and I think also for me personally, I really like to make things. And so I started making cakes in the beginning. That's how I kind of got my foot in the door in the kitchen. Um, and that went into gift giving. Like I like to show my love to people by giving them foods that I make. And so when I meet people for the first time, I'll often give them cookies or like
mm.
banana bread or whatever. And that's like a way to connect with people. So I think that's where it started.
Yeah, that's really neat. The gift giving thing is huge, because I think, almost like what Hayoung was saying about caring for someone that you love, and that's like a long term committed, familial relationship. That's giving food as love, but also in this case, it's like your introduction to somebody, maybe the first time you meet them or first time you spend time with them, that you impart that gift, kind of to indicate, like, I I'm here for more than just what I can get from you. Like, I have something that shows that, and it's something that um, everybody can appreciate. No one, it's not that it has to be practical. If you're a carpenter and you meet someone and you give them a table, it's like they might not need a table, and now they have that table taking up space. But anybody can eat cookies. They take a lot of care and time for preparation. There's like a warmth, literally, to them, and I like that a lot. I think that is a cool way of using something that you love as a direct message to somebody, which is really neat. Um, that's cool. And so it seems like both of you guys have had pretty broad ranging cultural experiences with food, like around the world, right? I mean, it's a pretty huge swath of places that you guys have been and eaten at, even just cafes in Berlin and all these different types of bread and things like that. So do you think that there are, well, I don't want to say this in a way that sounds reductive, maybe, of different places and puts others up, but do you think that there are places where they really have specifically figured out food and community and the marriage between the two? And where would that be that you've experienced, where you can say, no, like, I've eaten with people here and I've eaten with people here, but when I was in that place, like they understood that feeling. Even if you say, you know, I had people over and I was able to evoke that feeling in my apartment or at my friend's house or at, you know, wherever, like I was there in the moment and it was something that was close to me. That's, you know, the only real comparable example I have, I think, is a couple of years ago in Ecuador in South America. I did some missions work down there a couple of years in a row. And one of the days that we were there, we took a trip out to an indigenous group that's way up in the mountains in Ecuador. And it's like some of the most beautiful scenery and locations and everything I've ever seen. And the language barrier is twofold because there's some indigenous languages in Ecuador that are not Spanish, obviously. And so you have to have a translator from English to Spanish and then Spanish to their local dialect. And so you have almost no way with one translator for, you know, 30 or 40 people. You have almost no way of talking to somebody who's in front of you. But we got there, we hung out with them for a while, just kind of, they toured us around, we saw everything, and then we went into this room and they had poured out this huge array of beans and things of butter and like other vegetables and things, and there was salt in bowls all around, and so you'd pick up the beans and the butter and things like that, and you dip it in the salt and eat it. And, you know, if you're looking at it through just the lens of like, what is this food that I'm going to eat right now? It's like, it's good, it tastes very good, but it's not like a remarkable thing. But viewing it through the lens of, one, the effort to accumulate that much food in one place and give it to these tourists from North America, basically, who are not there helping you gather that food. They're just participating in eating it, is like so generous and giving. And then to, during that, want to engage with you, and they, you know, they would hand you things and say, hey, eat this. This is really good. Try it like this, or, you know, where even through language barrier, there's like a communal aspect to it. So I don't think of that now and think like, oh man, that was the best salt and beans I've ever had in my life. But I do think it would be like, that was like a really incredible, unique food experience that I probably will never duplicate. And I feel like that's localized. I don't feel like if I went into an Applebee's in the States as a someone from, you know, not from the United States or with a language barrier, that I would get that kind of welcome or that kind of experience where they're like, well, we'll feed you and we'll interact with you and whatever. I think that seemed to be something that was pretty core to, I don't know, that culture.
I think for me, if the food, so basically anything that gives the same intimacy as hot pot. I think every culture has something like that. Like even in the US, you can take Mexican food, you'll make it as white as possible, but you'll have a top, like, you know the trend where they'll take the table, the dining top table, and they'll put the trash bags over it, and they'll load the cheese. That's basically like the closest thing we can get to hot pot in terms of intimacy, where like you're eating from the same bowl or like table or garbage bag in that case, right?
Yep.
And for me, like I need to like physically like sit next to someone. They're touching my shoulder. I'm reaching for that chip. My hand touches their hand, and we just look at each other like, hey, and I'll feed it to them. Like I love that. Like, you know, with hot pot too, like I would fish out the meat. I would give you some on your plate. Like there's something about that for me. I think every culture has that. Like in Europe, you'll have raclette, and then you'll have fondue. So raclette is kind of like fondue, but then like the cheese, you have a wheel of cheese, like half a wheel of cheese.
Okay.
And then there's like this thing that's frying the cheese. Like it's just like this hot rod.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've seen cut it off. Yeah.
Videos of that on like Instagram or something. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. You eat like 3 of those and you're done. Like
that's incredible.
You're just, it's like, yeah, go on.
That is the cheese that I carved today.
Oh, no way.
I knew it.
That's incredible. What good timing. Yeah, hot pot is another one that I totally get. I mean, my wife and I get that in a lot of places that we go to when we've been traveling, whenever we can find it. I mean, she just loves it, just, you know, would eat it for every single meal. And I do really enjoy it as well. I think I'm less proactive about being like, we should go find that type of food. But I mean, Hayoung, you and I have had a hot pot at our place when we lived in Michigan with some friends, and it is like a very specific communal experience, and I think that's really neat. Do you think that it translates like wherever you have that meal or wherever you have that experience, it can be with any group of people? It's just that the food like commands that type of interaction?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily hot pot that makes it special, but you need some kind of like physical mixing where you're being physically vulnerable. Like you have to accidentally touch someone, or like
Yeah.
you're sharing the food from a singular location. So even with like Ethiopian food, right? It's just one bowl, and then everyone's fufu, and you're just taking it together. Like that's like hot pot. You know, like the
Yeah.
essence of hot pot is I think you can find that in most cultures, even in the US with the taco, like the nacho night. Like you can do it.
Well, you say even in the US, and I'm curious about that because I don't think I have the cultural or world knowledge context to say, like, is that really the exception here, where there's not really anything the same?
The pushback that I always have is that people think that the US offers nothing in terms of like culinary value. And while the US has gone, a lot of the culinary experience in the US is due to industrialization, right? And also individualism, where we can see the effect that it's had on our food. That doesn't mean that people aren't experiencing community through food in the US either. And so when I talk about like nacho night, a lot of people are going to reduce that to being like white people aren't really respecting this food. But my spin on it is more that people are trying their best.
Yeah.
And like we all want community in some way. And so like our food also reflects that, no matter how culinary or like inappropriate it might be culturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a range of different places, but there's a different impact or history maybe here in the States. Yeah, that's interesting. Sophie, do you have any specific place you wanted to highlight or talk about that with that similar experience? I mean, I feel like, we've kind of covered a few, but if you had one specifically, that's...
I wouldn't say specifically a place, but I think you're leading into something really important, because eating with people is just really important. Because I realized this most while I was living in Japan last year. During the pandemic, I moved by myself, and I started living with someone I didn't know. And in the beginning, when I first moved there, I was cooking for the both of us every night. But slowly I started to become a little afraid of using the kitchen and of her, because there are a lot of kitchen rules that were like, don't cook meat, or like be careful with the chicken, like don't leave any wet spots on the counter. So I got really scared, and eventually it kind of like drove us apart. And so I started to eat by myself in my room in hiding. And it's really hard to gauge what is normal when you're alone, when you're isolated. So I started to eat less and less, until one day I realized that I didn't look like myself in a photo that she took of me. Like months later, we went out to get soba together because we had to go run errands. And it was because I had gone from like 130 pounds to 90 without noticing.
Wow.
And it's like, when I realized that, it was like, no wonder I was so tired and cold all the time. No wonder I felt like I was going to get blown over by the wind when riding my bicycle. And so it's like, all that to say, eat with people. That's what's most important, and talk while eating, because when you eat together, that like you're basically family. When you eat together, you're family. And like commensality is so important. So yeah, it's like, it's not necessarily about the dish, but what's most important is the people that you're with and that you're eating with them.
Wow, that's a really great story and like context for that. The eating as like a reminder that you're a whole person and you deserve like community and interaction, and somebody there who can check in on you and be like, hey, you should probably have, seconds. You should probably eat more, like, or whatever the context is for each individual need, like to say, hey, you're out of sorts and we're here together and kind of resetting. Hey guys, really quick in the middle of this episode, just wanted to take a second to talk about something that I do that I'm really passionate about that I hope translates well to you guys. If you like listening to audio, but you need something to do with your hands and eyes while you're listening to an audio podcast, I've got this great thing for you. It's a magazine. It's called Exposure Magazine, spelled XPSR Mag. You can find us on Instagram at XPSR Mag. There you'll find the details to buy each issue as it's released. A couple issues have come out already. There's one new issue every single month. It's themed around something in photography that I'm excited about. And then I also every month have a highlight on an artist, whether it's a photographer or a visual artist that I'm inspired by. I do something with them and have kind of an artist profile with a bunch of their work in there as well. So it's not only my stuff, it's also a way for me to put on some visual artists that I think are really exciting. So check out XPSR Mag. That's Exposure Magazine at XPSR Mag on Instagram. Be sure to check it out. All right, let's jump back into this awesome conversation with Hayoung and Sofie.
How have you felt since eating hot pot for the first time? Like now that you've eaten it a couple times, like what do you like? What do you dislike? Have you had different types of hot pot? Like what's been going on?
Yeah, so it's funny because I'm like I kind of hinted at, like I am pretty like utilitarian with food, which is probably not a great character facet of me, but I'm very like I'm gonna go do something, so I'm just gonna eat something before I do it, and then I'm off to experience the whatever. Like I'm not gonna think about I'm going to go here and eat this specific food to have the experience of eating that food. With hot pot, it's interesting because I feel like it does require a headspace adjustment before I eat it, where I'm like, oh, like we're going to do this. That's going to be like the event. That's going to be like the thing that we do. So for me, that's very much like an attitude mindset adjustment because I'm just not used to thinking like that and thinking, okay, like the food is going to be, even if you go to a sit-down restaurant, whatever, there's still a tendency to be like, well, this is just lunch so that we can keep on with our day. I have to do this. I've said to Sofie, my wife, quite a few times, like if people talk about, the thing they wish they could eliminate, and some people say, I wish I didn't have to sleep so I could work more and whatever. And like, for me, I think of it as eating that. I'm like, I feel inconvenienced sometimes when I'm like, oh, I have to eat before I can, which I know this is like I'm going to get stoned for saying this, but it is like, it's something that I don't think is a necessary or great thing about myself, but I just tend to think like that, where I think, okay, I got to get this stuff done, or I want to go here, or I want to do this thing, so I have to eat before that can happen, just so I have the energy to do it. So it doesn't really matter what it is that I eat. But specifically with hot pot, and I think with any of those like more communal eating experiences, it is, if I get myself in the headspace, like, no, this is the event, this is the thing we're doing, is having this meal together, then it is a lot more enjoyable and you notice things about it. Specifically with hot pot, I really like it structurally because there's not a linear progression between like, you sit down, you order, you get handed what you're going to eat, and you eat it immediately, and then you get up and pay and leave. Like, there's a fluidity to the entire process where, like, you're brought out, like, the beginning of the meal, and then you have the option at any point to add to that, or to be like, oh, we want more of this, or I'm going to, there's like you can rearrange the structure. So then, if you have time, and you're sitting there and you're saying, this is really good, well, we don't have to be anywhere for another hour. I'm still hungry. Let's just keep the process going. And I really like that aspect, that there's not the same urgency. And I think that means the environment in places that make hot pot lends itself to that. They're not thinking of it like, okay, we have a rush, like we got to move these people through here and get them out of here for the next group. They're thinking, okay, well, people are here for hot pot. Like they're going to be here for a while. And so it's kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's open in that way. That's kind of my experience, and as time goes on, I'm sure I'll be better at appreciating the process and the experience of eating as less than just utility, so I can get on with my day.
I think that's a good way to say it, though. Like hot pot isn't a meal; like it's an event.
Yeah.
And yeah. I think you put into words what I was trying to describe about what I loved most about food, is when it's not a meal, when it's an event. And like certain foods allow us to do that.
Yeah. I wonder, because I was thinking about when you talked about equivalencies in different cultures of like, it's the same experience, it's not hot pot specifically, and thinking about that in the United States. And I was like, I wonder, I'm thinking like potlucks, like everyone bring a dish to pass, that has like notes of the same plan, the same approach where it's like this meal wouldn't exist without all the individual people present. And I think that's really neat. There's something about and then that was the other thing I was going to say is just the and I don't know if this is I guess I don't really know how broad a thing this is, but when I grew up, like it was a pretty small church community in a local area, and there was a lot of like 2 or 3 families are going to pool together in one home to make food, and that's going to be like an event night where the food is the event. Now, whether or not the food gets eaten kind of as it's, in the same way, like it still is that the goal is that we all have a meal together. And I think that for young people, that can probably be really important because you think of eating with your friends and there's a camaraderie or maybe a closeness like that the genesis of that in your adult life can definitely come from when you're younger, being like yeah I was sitting in the cafeteria with my friends and we would talk and have lunch, or I would go over to my friend's house for dinner and eat with his family, and it was a different experience. And like there's a lot of that where food is this as a narrative thread kind of ties through your life. But I did want to go towards something a little bit less optimistic. And I saw Hayoung, you post some things on Instagram about this topic and just food and emotion and like strongly evoked emotion through food experiences. Can either or both of you kind of dive into what that means, maybe for you personally, but also kind of like in the bigger picture, like what do you think is that link? How, I don't know how to articulate maybe better but I really like the way you talked about it on Instagram.
Some of this also began with me and Sofie meeting this artist in Berlin, where she drew a picture of us, and then we ended up just becoming friends with her. And she does like community art lessons, and that was some of my first times as an adult like doing art again. And I just went on this like rampage where I was drawing a lot of comic strips on food.
Nice.
There was a part of me that thought like, how can I cultivate us experiencing emotions or virtues through comic strips on food? Like, how can food teach us that? And so I was sharing that with Sofie, and she was, man, this girl was encouraging me like crazy. She's like, Hayoung, this is good. And I'm like, no, it's not. But that was kind of the first beginning of me really trying to have a solid theme or interest in food and emotions. And then I just decided to post it on Instagram and ask people like, hey, what do you think about food and emotions? Like, and specifically my question was like, what foods make you sad?
Yeah, which I thought was a really unique perspective on it, because I think people are way more likely to assume they're going to hear like, what food, makes you the happiest? What food can cheer you up when you're in a bad mood? What food can, and I think probably most people have like their 1 or 2 things that they're like, if I'm feeling down, like I just have a hot dog with ketchup and mustard, and then I'm rocking and rolling. Like, but I don't know. I read the question and I couldn't even think of an answer, but I knew that it was in there. I just thought, well, yeah, I guess there's got to be something that I could think of. That could, oh man, that like I can't eat that. It depresses me.
Exactly. And I wanted to ask that question in that way because people usually think of like breakup foods, like, oh, I eat this when I'm sad. But my question was, what foods make you sad?
Yeah.
Right.
That's really powerful. Do both of you guys have an answer for that? That's like the thing that will make you sad or feel down?
I realized I have so many foods that make me sad, which I don't know if that just means I'm an extremely emotional person.
I think that you have a range of foods, and you are very good at identifying the emotions linked to them. So you're more likely to have some sad foods because you also have a bunch of happy foods and a bunch of energetic or slow meditative. Like you have identity tied to foods, so that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. I guess I could share when I was doing I used to be part of a like homeless medical clinic, and we would do a lot of harm reduction advocacy and education at different homeless encampments. And there was a lady that I had been during outreach, we ended up developing a good friendship, and she was in her 60s and she was homeless, but she also had cancer. And then about 6 months in, she finally got approved for housing. And when she lived in her own space, she started to cook.
Mm.
So So she made us a cheesecake, and we Sofie and I, she was part of my outreach team, and we ate the cheesecake together. And it was honestly like, it wasn't a good cheesecake. Like it mainly tasted like cream cheese, to be honest. It was like a no bake cake. It just tasted like cream cheese. But it wasn't bad. It was like cream cheese and sugar. Like that's cheesecake right there.
Yep.
And her her chemo was improved, like her cancer was going away. It seemed like her life was improving. And then during COVID, I get a call from her daughter-in-law, butt dialed. Like her daughter-in-law butt dialed me.
Oh my goodness.
And I call, and then she calls me, and she's like, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt dial you." And I'm like, "Oh, it's okay." And at this point, I'm in Michigan in grad school,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Call her, and I'm just like, "Hey, like, how's Jackie doing?" And then the daughter-in-law is like, "Oh, she died, or she passed
Oh,
away from COVID." And I was floored. Like I just wasn't expecting that, because her life was just going up in this upward trajectory.
mm,
And I just remember having to tell Sofie that, and the rest of the outreach team. And that was quite hard. And so I just, when I think about a no bake a poorly made no bake cheesecake, like I don't even want to think about it.
yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
You
I'm
remember
so
you,
upset. I
you remember
remember
that
when
phone
you
call?
called me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was in Japan at driving school and I just sat by the river and cried.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. That's wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, I think that, well, I want to say first for both of you guys, I think that's really great. And it stands out that there was a connection that impactful for you after you weren't directly tied with that outreach group, that you weren't physically there and having someone pass away, and you're like, that connection and that memory like lasted long enough that when you heard about it later, it was still just as impactful. I think that yeah, I mean, that can be a testament to both like food and just human connection already. And I feel like I don't know. I don't know that I would have the same kind of mental I don't want to say fortitude, but the resilience to be able to have those interactions and really give myself into them. I think that is like a unique thing to be able to, you put weight and connection into those acts of service and the outreach that you guys were doing. So then later it does sting 100 times more than someone who was just there to do a job and go home. But it's also really cool that you have a specific memory attached to that person, that it gets to be about food. And, you know, that's the kind of silly motivational, whatever, quote about the last time that you actually you die, and then the time you die for real is the last time your name is ever mentioned, right? But in this scenario, as long as people are making bad cheesecakes and you guys are interacting with them, like, she's still there to some extent.
Yeah.
And I think that is really cool. It's sad, but there's some joy in that, that there's a food that evokes a person. And I think that as you guys do the work you're doing and you're moving towards these goals, you're going to have the opportunity to amplify that message and talk about a lackluster cheesecake and get that name and that story in front of people. And yeah, I think hopefully that helps people reckon with, yeah, what food makes me sad? Like, they have this very specific intersection with someone's life, and I must have those, but I'm not thinking about them with food, you know?
And that's just, sometimes food terrifies me, because it blurs the lines between work, like the walls that we've built up for ourselves to like protect ourselves. Food kind of just obliterates those walls that we've built up. So when I first started outreach with Jackie and getting to know her, honestly, it was like I got to know her, but there wasn't any like real strong emotional connection.
Mm.
And then when I started bringing her food and she started making cheesecake, she made us applesauce. Like food just obliterated all the walls that we wanted to protect ourselves.
Mm.
And it like destroys the illusion that we're like, we have autonomy and we're independent from each other. And
Right.
it forces us to be like, to reckon with one another. And so in some ways, food is terrifying, and sometimes we recognize that, and sometimes we don't.
Hayoung, did you want to talk a little bit about? I remember you mentioned like the redemptive quality of foods. Like, so it's not all just sad.
Yeah.
Yes. So shout out to our friend Yuri Choi. We will get her on the podcast for the next time.
Yes.
Peter invites us, but Yuri's
course.
also part of our team, and she's from SoCal, and she was sharing with me how in therapy, therapists will ask, what would your current self say to your younger self?
Oh, wow.
And so kind of building off of that, she just inspired me to think about how food can be redemptive, where like if the food is at the center here, our past self saw it in this one way, but that doesn't mean like it's set in stone like that, but that we could redeem that food and those emotions many years later.
Yeah.
And I've done that. I haven't done that with cheesecake yet, like the no-bake cheesecake. I'm still working through a lot of like what her death meant, what it didn't mean. How do I honor her death? But with other foods, I've definitely had redemptive experiences, I think.
Yeah.
Sophie, anything you want to add?
So when Hayoung first asked that question, the food that came to mind for me was tuna mayo onigiri. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a rice triangle wrapped in seaweed, and on the inside is a filling, and that filling for that rice triangle happens to be a mixture of tuna and mayonnaise, and it's like one of the most popular onigiri types, according to 7-Eleven in Japan.
Okay.
It's like ranking number one years and years in a row. But anyways, that came to mind because it was the food that I ate the night my grandma died when I was turning 6. It was the night before I turned 6, just a few hours. So I was technically 5. We were in the hospital. I was at volleyball practice. My dad came to pick me up, and I had never seen him so like stone faced. I was like, what happened? What happened? And then eventually he told me, he was like, your grandma's heart stopped. And I didn't know what that means as a 5-year-old. So I was like, what? So we went there, and lo and behold, my grandma was dead. I didn't know what to do, so I ended up like sitting out in the waiting room by myself. And I could hear like adults. So it was like a really, I don't know how to say it. It was a night filled with a lot of people, and yet it was so lonely. And so I was just sitting there in the waiting room, and that night my dinner was that onigiri from a convenience store, and it was just me and that thing. So in a way, that food is a really sad food for me, but at the same time, like I said this to Hayoung too, but it's really multifaceted because it's not just a sad food. It's a food that kids love to pieces. We eat it for like field trips and sports day, and my little sister loves it. She eats it every day for lunch nowadays. And so it's like, it's a complicated question because for me, there isn't one food that just like is sadness, that embodies sadness. It like, even this one food has so many sides to it, so many stories attached to it.
Wow, that's really interesting. The convergence of it being both sad for you and exactly at the same time being redeemed by other people's experience of the food. I think that's really cool because I think when you say like the redemptive quality of food, I think, okay, so you have a bad experience or something, and then 10 years later you eat it for the first time again, and you think, oh, like, you know, this is great, I love it now, or this is healing some part of me. But for you in that instance, that's like a parallel experience of like you having this negative association, but it also being simultaneously like a beautiful thing or something that has good in it. And I think that's really cool and hard to recognize. I think probably a lot of people would just say, well, you know, I'm glad they like it, but it's clearly something sad and horrible, and not recognize that there is still goodness in it. which is really neat. Yeah, that's cool. I like that a lot, that redemptive aspect of food. So we're coming up on our time here. I don't want to keep you guys too long. But before I let you guys go, I don't want to hold you too long. I wanted to give a chance to kind of circle back to the beginning, the genesis of your guys' project together, and say, what can someone who is just hearing this for the first time, maybe has seen things online from you guys, but in general is just kind of coming into your experience, and this applies to me specifically. What can I do that either amplifies and pushes for the things that you guys want to advocate, or will enable you to do that in a better way? Is there something that I can, as simple as repost my Instagram posts on your story and tell all your friends, or as personal as, when you're eating a meal with someone, think about this about the meal, or, what are things that I can do and others can do that gets on board with what you guys are doing?
Well, right now we're looking for artists who want to participate, who love food and want to, I guess, foster a community where eating is more intentional, that we take more time when we eat. And so if anyone who is listening wants to contribute art, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. That's great. That's a very practical thing. Creative people attract more creative people. So that's
true. They really do, though. I'll give you two things. One's kind of as a joke, but also serious. In a book called The Supper of the Lamb, it's written by an Episcopalian priest who kind of wrote a memoir. It's like a cookbook / memoir of food and faith and contemplation. But in some of his opening chapters, he talks about how before you start cooking and slicing an onion, stare at it for an hour. And so, like, if you want to go 0 to 100, get an onion and look at it for an hour. And I probably did it for like 10 minutes. And it's really changed. Like, when I cut into an onion, like, I had a dream actually about that onion a couple days later.
It was like an episode of VeggieTales in your head.
Yeah. But I would say, like, just don't eat food just because it tastes good or you can Instagram it, which I think is our typical response, or like our typical posture towards food. But
yeah,
eat it and try to remember important memories that you've had from that food, and act on your remembrance. And so when you eat McDonald's at night and it reminds you of your friend, text your friend and say, hey, like, I'm eating this and I remember the good times that we've had. And I think that's the best way to cultivate, like, because that's the best way to cultivate an intentional way of eating that makes us better humans and better lovers. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you guys for jumping on for the inaugural episode of this show. Super exciting to talk with you, and I'm glad that we got to connect.
Thank you for inviting us.
Oh yeah, no, of course. I there's a lot to take away, to think about from this conversation. So I appreciate that insight, and I think that anyone who hears this will appreciate it as well. And I really can't wait to get it in front of people's ears and eyes and say, hey, there's more to eating than just sitting down and fueling your body and moving on. And that's a lesson I need to learn more than maybe most people. But I think you guys have a very cool perspective, and I'm super excited to see where this goes. And we'll definitely have a catch-up conversation as time goes on, to see as you guys benchmark your progress in this.
Yeah.
Cool.
Before we go, though, I have a question for you.
Sure. Yeah.
This podcast is called Ketchup, so I was wondering what your favorite condiment was.
That's good. That's good. Well, the funny thing is, so I named the show Ketchup because I like the idea of a really stupid, bad pun of just like, I'm catching up with people that I want to talk to. I'm kind of catching up on the projects they're working on, right? I, through and through, I would put mustard on everything under the planet. Like, if you had to get rid of ketchup from existence and I could put mustard on every meal, I would do it. As a kid, I used to put ketchup on animal crackers. That was like one of my favorite snacks. Which it's even now I think of it, I'm like a little nauseated. But I love mustard. I don't know. I would put mustard on animal crackers. That was my childhood snack. And
what kind of mustard?
It used. I mean, I'll eat. I mean, now, yeah, it was just like regular yellow mustard from the supermarket. I do really like Dijon mustard and other all that kind of stuff.
Here's the thing: the fact that you love mustard, for me, I know that the more you discover and the more you remember food, people who like mustard tend to love food because like there's something very complex about mustard. And so I think you're on the right track. Like,
Yeah.
I know that like you're actually deep down like a real food lover.
I hope so. It would be a very cool thing to discover about myself. So I hope you're right about that, and I think that there's definitely some truth in it. It's a complex condiment that not everybody understands, but I love it. All right, well, I will let you guys get back to your busy lives, and I will touch base with you down the line, kind of keep track of what you guys are doing. So great to talk with you guys. Thanks for coming on, and have a great one.
Great seeing you,
Nice to meet
brother.
you, Peter.
All right, good to talk to you guys. See ya.
Bye.